So what's this I hear about like banks regulating whether or not a lady can show their breasticles?
You're gonna have to expound on that a little bit. What
that wasn't succinct enough. I was trying to. I'm gonna have to.
No, it was succinct. It was.
Are you saying that I have to go a little deeper into this topic?
It was too succinct. Is there a news item which has made you think about this? I abbreviated
a little too much. I heard OnlyFans is gonna stop doing what OnlyFans is only there to do. Only from what I understood.
Well,
not that I've ever been on it or anything or enjoyed any of the fruits of their labor.
For some, I guess, as it were. Okay, so I have a general idea of where you're going with this one. So yes, OnlyFans, no more adult content. Let's put it that way.
And our collective hearts weep.
Well,
for all those at-risk teenagers.
Yeah, that got a hold of their mom's credit card.
They're like, holy hell.
But this girl really loves me. You don't understand, boobies. Mom.
She just needs a refrigerator.
I'm the only one she's sending these pictures
and a down payment on her Ferrari. That's it. And then after that.
Yes. So banks regulated it. Yes and no. It's my understanding that what happened was, and I think, as a matter of fact, it's partially blamed for your girl.
Who's my girl?
Bella Thorne.
We will discuss this another day. I don't know how she got labeled as my girl. Go ahead.
So apparently something happened where, I mean, she had her OnlyFans going and then like some fans paid for some content that she didn't deliver on. Oh. And they got upset and,
as one does.
And withdrew their account or whatever. And so this made some banks nervous that were like, well, we can't really police the content that actually gets delivered and whether or not the customer's preferences are being satisfied. So then they started putting the vice grips to OnlyFans in terms of funding for different things on the platform. And so OnlyFans was like, well, we can nip that in the bud right here and we'll just ban adult content from our service entirely.
Nip that in the bud or the butt? Ayo! Anyway.
That is a very, very Cliff Notes version of my understanding of the situation. So yes, banks have interjected themselves into this thing, but ultimately it's a decision of OnlyFans to kind of tighten up the platform a little bit.
I thought they can only regulate whether or not I get a house or could live my life properly. But now
all kinds of other things.
Now they're dipping a toe into whether or not I can get my rocks off. That is just something else. What will they think of next? Oh, excuse me. What will they limit next? But do you want to be honest with the dear listeners of why we're recording this so late this week, or do we want to just skirt over the topic of?
They don't have any idea when we're recording this because they're going to get the episode at the same time.
I'm being open and honest with them. We were doing a social experiment on, is it TLC, the Learning Channel?
Oh my God, don't even.
It doesn't matter. Anyway.
Listen, sometimes you accidentally watch a show because other people in your house really want to watch that show.
In our defense, and I'll take some of the blame too. I was just as engrossed as he was.
And you're like, this is a terrible show, but damn it, it's like a train wreck.
It's a terrible show with terrible people, but it's a Sunday night.
Anyway, all we need to say is that it's TLC, and then we'll let you fill in the blanks. But
it was a tell-all.
It was quite
riveting.
It's not our proudest moment, okay? that it stayed on the TV
all
for
we'll say is,
period of time.
Don't be a Tiffany, all right? Don't you be a Tiffany.
How dare
don't
you?
Go chasing waterfalls, and don't be a Tiffany.
Insert Greta Thunberg, how dare you meme here.
How dare you.
All right, so with that word vomit of an intro, are you ready to jump in?
Absolutely.
All right, let's jump in. Welcome to Weapons of Meme Destruction Podcast, episode 57. I'm Dane, and he's
David.
And we are your gracious co-host, ready to guide you through another episode of what the hell is wrong with the world. But we're going to be funny about this one, and it's not COVID related. Can't promise you the term won't come up a time or two because there are corollaries, but it's not COVID
This
related.
Is kind of, you know what it's kind of like? It's kind of like you're going back out on the dating scene. And you're like, I swear to God, I'm not going to talk about my ex. I'm not going to talk about my ex. I'm not going to talk about my ex. And then you get a couple of cocktails in after you've asked her about her interests. And then you're like so anyway, my ex used to do that. I'm like, damn it. Like, it just finds its way into your conversation somehow. But anyway.
Yes. Unfortunately, COVID has infected everything, but that's not what this episode's about. But where can you find this episode? You'll be able to find it on any podcast catcher. Just search for Weapons of Meme Destruction. You can also link up with us on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And just search Weapons of Meme Destruction on any platform, and you'll be able to find us. Link up, drop a comment, come over to the website, wmdpodcast.com/57 to jump in the comment section on this episode in particular and tell us why we are 100% right on everything that has to do with the debacle that happened in Afghanistan this week. So, with that being said,
it didn't look like you buried the lead that hard.
I did not. We are in the shit, as they say.
So Dane, what are we talking about this week?
So it's actually probably not that anything too earth-shattering happened in terms of developments Afghanistan-wise within the last 48 hours. It's actually better that we have waited a little bit on this topic so we could let more facts on the ground develop and not, insert foot and mouth disease on this situation. But I have some pretty strong feelings about this topic. I think David does too. And just let it be known, because we have heard the criticism. We've talked about it in previous episodes that maybe we're too hard on the lefties and too soft on the righties. And if anybody ever hits you with that again, send them to episode 57, because we got things to say.
Listen, we've been talking a big game. We're saying we hold the right accountable just as much as the left and yada, yada, yada. Now, here's our time to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, or whatever straps that keep your boots on. If you even wear boots, maybe you have high heels on today because you're feeling fancy, want your legs and butt to look good. Whatever they are, here's the time to pull them up.
Yeah. So, unless you've been living under a rock, you've heard about the haphazard Afghanistan withdrawal and all of the, crises. It seems to be one after another every single day. People jumping on planes, falling off of them, leaving the airport. Billions, I think of the last tally, something like $80 billion worth of U.S. equipment has been left.
Refugees handing babies over fences because they want a better life for themselves.
Yeah.
It's not nice.
Yeah, no, it's an ugly withdrawal. I'm sure you've seen the pictures of the Chinook landing on top of the U.S. Embassy to quick evac people, just like Saigon and Vietnam in 1975. It's just a clusterfuck in every sense of the word. And, if you have picked up on any sort of common theme in all of our episodes, this is par for the course for government. Everything it does is screw everything up. And that's kind of the meme that we want to destroy with this episode, using Afghanistan as the kind of teaching device, is that this concept that without government, you wouldn't be safe. Scott Horton, which we'll mention a couple of times in this episode, and if you're not aware of him, you definitely have to look him up, because he is the foreign policy expert of foreign policy experts all over the world, let alone in libertarian circles. And he's written a book on the subject matter called Enough Already, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. And what he says about this whole situation is this is your security force. This is what you pay almost $1 trillion a year in taxes, is for expertise and the best fighting force in the world, and everything, sun shines from their ass as far as foreign policy goes. And this is what they're capable of. After 20 years, $2.2 trillion in spending, untold loss of civilian life in Afghanistan, as well as American soldiers' lives. And this is what we have to show for it.
To perfectly summarize it in semantic theme, this is like when Forrest Gump started running and running and running. And then all of a sudden one day he goes, I'm kind of tired. I think I'm going to go home now. And they're like, what the fuck? Where are you going? He just starts walking home. He walks home. That's basically what we did in Afghanistan. We're like, all right, we're done with this one. Where's the next toy? Just shoved the plate. Didn't clean our plate. Didn't do anything. Didn't bring it to the dishwasher. We just shoved it off the table and let it smash into the sketty, and meatballs goes flying everywhere. Ugh, just a mess.
I mean, it's a mess for not only in terms of obviously the people actually living in Afghanistan and the life that they're going back into.
Oh, that's not even.
But by the end of this episode, you're going to be pretty disheartened at the life that the United States had set up for them in the last 20 years period. Like, the whole thing has been an unmitigated tragedy from start to finish. And the reason why the American foreign policy, consensus that exists in DC and has existed basically since the end of World War II, is because you're not allowed to question everything. And it goes back to this meme of, this is what keeps you safe at night. You kind of see it in these memes, freedom isn't free, or, sometimes you'll see pictures of it shows like, American soldiers are fighting and dying overseas so that you can have your freedom here at home. And all of those little memes are subtle little indicators to you. Don't question the foreign policy consensus. Don't criticize it, because damn it, the fact that you have freedom to even question or criticize it at all is because of the sacrifices that are being made on your behalf. That is utter, complete, and absolute bullshit.
Well, what they did was they took your criticism, which is really a protection for the people to make sure that they're not throwing their lives away. Like, are we sure that this is what's necessary for the troops? Because the way around that suddenly became, I support the troops, but not the war. To criticize or to think critically about what we're doing over there, that's not an affront to the military boys fighting the boys and girls fighting the good fight. It's just making sure that they're fighting for the right reasons, so that they're not being put in harm's way for no good reason. But they took that and turned it on its head, like you were saying, and they weaponized your not following orders.
Yeah,
so to speak.
And don't misunderstand us and believe us. If you are a listener that has been listening, if this is your first episode, give us a shot at listening to more episodes in the past and in the future before you pass judgment. But what you will hear from the neocons of the world, the ones that say you're not supposed to, criticize this stuff, is they will say that any criticism is you're against the troops, as opposed to the executives at Boeing and Raytheon that are making billions and billions of dollars off these endless wars, or the dipshits in the DC think tanks that just write white paper after white paper saying this is why we need to invade that country. Dang, this is the reason why we need to topple that dictator.
You're being a conspiracy theorist, Dane. This never happens.
I know. Listen, everything they do just turns out swimmingly for everybody all the time. But we want to be clear that this is not an anti-troops, anti-military per se position that we have here. And the fact that they are able, and what I mean by they is, the neocons on both the left and the right. This isn't a right exclusive thing, but the foreign policy consensus, why they're able to get away with that room temperature IQ level response to shut down the debate is because of these memes. Because, well, don't you know, damn it, that the U.S. government is what keeps you safe. It's what allows you to be free. People dying over there is so that you don't have to die over here. That stupid shit that we hear ad nauseum. And those are the memes that need to be destroyed so that we can question and critically think about what the foreign policy establishment is doing and selling to us, and put a stop to it before we wind up in another 20-year quagmire and waste a bunch of money.
All we're saying is we want them to be accountable for what they've done. If you remember 9/11, which we're coming up on the anniversary, how they spun it was they said that they attacked us because they abhor our way of life. If you remember that, if you remember way back when, that was one of the main reasons why they attacked us, because they thought, never mind the fact that we've been meddling in their country and their politics and their lives for so long. No accountability on their side. It was, they wanted to hurt America because America's free.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
That makes total sense.
The only reason that Osama wanted to take down the Twin Towers is because women are allowed to wear blue jeans and walk freely without a man by their side in Times Square.
And gay people can get married. Oh, God.
Yeah.
Could you imagine?
It has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that the United States, bombs hospitals full of children or wedding parties.
Or trained him.
Civilians.
Or trained him to do their bidding,
exactly.
by the way. No.
To fight the Russians
Osama,
in
never
where?
heard of him.
To fight the Russians where in the 80s? Oh, yeah, Afghanistan.
What are all these checks to Mr. Bin Laden? Yeah, it's no relation. I don't know who this Osama guy is.
So, and David brings up a good point, which is a good segue into one of the articles that kind of gave us the impetus for this episode this week is an article in The Atlantic, which we'll link on the show notes page at wmdpodcast.com/57. It's an article in The Atlantic by a Tom Nichols. And by the way, I looked into this guy after I read the article and just fuck this guy with something hard and sandpapery. He is one of the quintessential, double-digit IQ foreign policy consensus opinion molders in DC that you will run across. His arguments are stupid. They're full of non sequiturs.
Before you go in on this guy.
It's all moral grandstanding.
Before you go in on this guy, and they're like, geez, Dane really hates this guy for no goddamn reason.
I told you, we're going in on the righties.
For no goddamn reason. Maybe you should give them the reason why you don't. Give them some examples from the article and feed the little baby birds before you start telling them how bad the world is.
Okay, yes, sorry. Sometimes the tail wags the dog here.
Yeah.
I get kind of worked up about matters of
Get worked
war
up after you tell them all the shitty things that he's done.
So he wrote an article in The Atlantic last week titled, very succinctly, "Afghanistan is your fault." I mean, and that...
Go on.
I'd
love to hear this argument.
The subtitle being, "The American Public Now Has What It Wanted." And... all throughout the article, and I'm not going to quote from it because, I read through it once and that made me see red enough.
Yeah, your blood pressure spiked a little bit. Your BPM shot up a bit.
And the basic takeaway is, and it's funny because again, these people made the same arguments in Vietnam. They made the same arguments in Iraq War I, Iraq War II. They make it in Afghanistan. They made it in Korea. They make the argument every time is the American people didn't have the stomach to fight. They weren't willing to do what it took to really throw everything behind the American forces and give them all the support that they need in order to bring, to win, quote unquote, the war in Afghanistan like we did against the Nazis. That's he didn't bring up World War II in particular, but that's the basic gist of the argument. It's the American public's lack of will to fight.
We were too busy. I think some of his indictments were that we were too busy going to malls and too worried about keeping up with the Joneses, pretty much is what he was saying throughout the entire article, to really care about the war, which that's interesting. It's a very interesting take, but not to segue too fast. I'm sure we'll get to it if I jump my bridges, but we were there. It's a multi-generational war. I don't know is it our first multi-generational war? Anyway,
it's the longest. It's
the longest, right?
Yeah.
So at least it's the longest.
But 20 years is one generation.
What job could you give any other entity 20 years? And what was the final total? $2.2 trillion? Or how much money was that?
According to a study by, I think it was Brown University, roughly about $2.2 trillion was spent in Afghanistan.
If you told NASA, I want you to build a new planet in 20 years with $2.2 trillion, well, maybe not NASA. You give that to Elon Musk or Bezos, and they will find a way to build a new Earth that's kind of cool. It's kind of like Tron-y and virtual. They will have that done in 15 years and might have come in under budget. What the hell were they doing for 20 years, $2.2 trillion, and all, not to skirt past that issue, which that's the tertiary issue, all the lives on both sides of this war that were fought and lost? What did we have to show for it? What was going to be benefited by it?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question in particular about what were they doing for 20 years, because that's another kind of one of these means. And we're going to go in on Congressman Dan Crenshaw too, which again, he's not somebody you're allowed to question, especially on matters of foreign policy, because he was, I believe, a SEAL, but if not, he was.
And before we do, we're going to thank him for his service. He's an American patriot. Well, 50% of the podcast will thank him for his service and serving the country. In the
go
military.
ahead, okay. because if you're no matter what,
how the hell am I the saving grace on this episode? I'm usually the one damning us and tying the tying our laces around the cinder blocks before we jump in the pool.
Here's my view on that. And this is specifically tied to him. Again, not to, I don't really care what the neocons are going to say about me in particular if they hear this episode, because they're going to say it no matter how vitriolic I get. But, they're going to try to say, my hatred for Nichols or the arguments that Dan Crenshaw are making now is basically applying to all of the troops, and that I don't support the troops. And again, I don't care that they're going to say that, because again, anybody with an IQ above room temperature knows that's not what I'm saying. We come from a family of military members. My brother is currently active military. I had cousins in the military. Our grandfather, go back and listen to episode 1, was in the military. My other grandfather was in World War II. So again, this whole idea that if you question the foreign policy decisions that are made in DC, then obviously you don't support the troops on the ground is just stupid. But the reason why I won't thank Dan Crenshaw, quote unquote, for his service in particular is because I don't care what you did in the military. If you come home and you get a platform like a U.S. congressman, or you use your platform in any way, shape, or form to buttress, to give support, to lend credence to this intelligentsia in D.C. that continues to send young men off to fight and die for old men's wars, you are probably even worse than some, pinhead think tank guy who's never seen war, who's saying we need to go to war here and there, because you're giving it credibility.
And then also, to tack onto that argument, you've been there, you fought that fight, you know what it looks like, so you should have a better knowledge and be a little less willing to be so hawkish.
Yeah.
That's what I will say.
So, I mean, you're doing more than betraying your brothers in arms by doing that, because just because you happen to get home, and again, Dan Crenshaw didn't come home completely intact. He had an eye wound and stuff like that. So it's not like he hasn't seen and been injured by the terribleness of war, but he's willing to, like, I don't know, I guess overlook that, or be like, I don't know what his game is, other than sucking up to, again, the foreign policy establishment.
Well, what did he come out and say
throughout the GOP? And we will get into that, but to your, because I wanted to segue from your point about what we've been doing for 20 years, and this is going to get into something that Crenshaw will say later, and I'll quote him directly, is now they'll try to say, oh, it's about human rights and the Taliban don't respect women and that's why we need to stay and all this kind of stuff. Well, this is what the American regime was propping up in Afghanistan. It is a known thing that many powerful men in the Afghani government that we set up and supported, and by we I mean the United States government, not the American citizen, are pedophiles and sex slave traffickers of the worst kind. There's a New York Times article, we'll link on the show notes page, about U.S. service members being told explicitly, ignore the screams of young boys being raped by these men that we're propping up because, damn it, they're not the Taliban and they're on our side. There's a story in Scott Horton's book, Enough Already, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, where he recounts that 3 Marines were killed on base in their while they were working out in the weight room. And it got tried to cover up after the fact why they were killed. Well, what happened was we were supporting a local police chief in some, town out in the middle of nowhere, Afghanistan. And this police chief was known around the entire community as a known raper, keeping of sex slave of young boys.
Right.
And one of the young boys, I think he was 15 years old at the time or something, he escaped this guy's clutches, went onto the base and was so mad at the United States military for propping this guy up that he went on base and he killed these 3 Marines.
What a nice little small snapshot of the entirety of this butt fuck of a situation.
Right. So this idea...
Again, that was probably poor terminology. I didn't...
Very poor choice of
words. Pass. Let me apologize for that one.
Yeah. So, I mean, but that's the thing. So like Crenshaw and the people that want to stay there forever and have no exit strategy whatsoever, because in his words, it's a strategic objective of national security to stay there indefinitely. They'll say, oh, well, what about the women's rights? And what about this? And what about that? And we're not dismissing that as a concern, but we are saying that what we've been doing, what our military has been doing over there is not exactly all rainbows and sunshine. And basically Kabul was like Cleveland, Ohio, and now it's going back into some third world hellhole. We have been supporting some of the very worst people you could possibly imagine to rule over these people. But because they're part of the Afghani government that's an ally of the American regime, again, not the American people or America in general, but of the regime that thinks that these forever wars are a good idea, then it's okay. And the American soldiers just said, look the other way when you hear the screams of young children being abused because they're being abused by our allies. There are no angels in this. And America leaving now, as opposed to a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, another $2 trillion down the drain, another couple thousand American lives down the drain, another few wedding parties and hospitals blown to smithereens by Hellfire missiles. Doing all of that isn't going to change a damn thing as far as the outcome. So to come over here and say, well, that's why we need to stay there forever is just missing the forest for the trees by such a large amount. I can only assume either evilness or absolute disingenuousness of the worst kind.
Well, I've heard arguments to that forever war thing that said, well, we still have, bases in Germany. We still have, bases over in this place and that place. And that was just to make sure that if they needed to be like, that's not how that works. That's not how any of this works. Like, if you wanted to set up a base there, that's fine. We're not saying we weren't at war with Germany for all those years that we had a base there. We weren't at war with its people. We're still at war with this place. And it kind of brings us nicely to what I'm assuming is our next segment is how messy the pullout was. Because I've seen, or are we going to go in on Crenshaw next?
Well, before we get into that, we do want to break a second just for a quick episode, something we've been talking about in the last couple episodes, and maybe you've seen it on some of our Instagram posts. If not, go check it out. But the Solutionary Summit. And before we get into the general discussion, we do want to encourage you, go to our social media. You'll find a QR code. And that QR code will allow you, if you're a Miami local, but if you use that QR code, you will get tickets to the event for only $20, which is an amazing deal because general admission tickets were initially $100, but now you can get them for $20. So check it out on our social media. But here's a little bit more information about the Solutionary Summit.
Hey, Dane, as we clatter our way through this episode, this sounds like a good time for a advertisement break.
If we had one?
Maybe if we did.
Well, you're in luck because we do.
Oh, I was going out on a limb there.
The Solutionary Summit 2021 will be held in our backyard, Miami, Florida, September 3rd through the 5th. What is the Solutionary Summit, you ask? It's a 3-day event that will present a host of independent thinkers from all backgrounds. They will have panels on economics, cultural discussions, and political strategy from a powerful lineup of speakers. The panels will also include Q&A sessions discussing freedom, attacks on liberty, race relations, effective community outreach, and other current topics.
Dane, this sounds like a momentous occasion. How would I acquire tickets to it?
Oh, it is very momentous, but you better act fast because there's only 250 seats available and they will sell out quickly. So reach out to us on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, anywhere you find weapons of meme destruction. Drop us a DM, drop us a comment, ask how to get tickets to the Solutionary Summit 2021, and we will hook you up. Because at the end of the day, if you want to see the world, and in particular your community, freer in your lifetime, then the Solutionary Summit 2021 in Miami, Florida, September 3rd through 5th is the place to be. You'll get to meet your gracious co-hosts here as well as the panel of speakers.
How could you refuse?
So, come join us at the Solutionary Summit, where freedom is the topic and order of the day, and how you can, there's going to be a great panel of speakers on how you can, make the world a little bit freer in your own communities, and start there first and work out from there. So, unlike the freedom that the United States is not spreading to places like Afghanistan, I think we can do Joe a little bit of. Joe's going to get his comeuppance too in this episode. But Joe in particular, because he's on the hook for this. This, again, we're going in on the righties and the neocons, but let's be honest, the left-wing anti-war movement kind of disappears when there's a Democrat in office.
Right.
Like, let's not be naive about it. And Joe, in typical Joe fashion, bungled this thing about as bad as you possibly could.
Well, again, you might say that this war was handed to him. Sure, Trump made this particular agreement before he ever got into office. But let's also not forget that Joe got elected because he knows how Washington works, number one. That was one of his big selling points, was that he's been in Washington, he knows how to get deals done, he knows how to do this, that, and the other. He's the guy, he's the quarterback that you've always wanted in the White House. And to put another note on his CV, he's also been handling this war since its inception. He was a high-ranking senator when they voted to go to war at the very beginning of this. So he had 8 years as a senator as a high-ranking senator under Bush's presidency. Then he became the vice president, got daily briefs on the war for 8 years as vice president to Obama. Then, he took 4 years off, but I'm sure he was still within the know. And then he comes back for another year of this thing that he's pretty much been involved in the entire time in his last 3 decades in Washington.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Joe does not have clean hands in this thing. And actually, when the wars were getting ready to get kicked off in the early 2000s, it was actually Joe who kind of spearheaded the whipping up of votes from Democrats in support of it. Because when the discussions were being had about whether these wars could go on or not, Joe spearheaded getting support from the Democrats who otherwise could have stopped it. They had the numbers to stop it, but Joe did his duty, not for the country but for the foreign policy establishment, and whipped up support for the wars from the Democratic side of the aisle. So he's not innocent in this whole thing. But it is not lost on us that Obama did say when he picked Joe to be his VP that part of the reason for picking Joe was because of his foreign policy chops, and that, at least word on the street is, that during the Obama administration, Joe was probably the most vocal in terms of winding down or ending the wars. And he was going up against the Hillary Clintons of the world in the administration, who, has never seen a conflict she didn't like. And so, Joe was kind of the one during the Obama years who were saying, I don't know if he was saying, let's get out, but he was not near as hawkish as other people in the administration. So, it's not surprising that Joe wanted to go in this direction, but none of that excuses the just kind of complete ineptitude that this happened. And I've seen questions all over social media like, oh, well, how would a libertarian president have done this differently? And, it's really just a lot of common sense stuff. I mean, first things first, don't telegraph your entire timeline to the whole world, let alone the enemy. Like, that's for starters. The second one, maybe spend a year or two pinpointing who our Afghan allies are that helped us, that would be at risk of life and limb if the Taliban took back over, and work on their immigration status so you're not scrambling on the last day. Or maybe if you're going to draw down, maybe you do a slow draw back down to a focal point that you eventually leave from, so that you're not leaving entire bases full of guns and, aircraft and vehicles and everything else. I think, like I said, the last tally was about $80 billion worth of U.S. equipment has been seized by the Taliban at this point. There's a more measured, controlled, responsible way to get out of this thing, as opposed to what the Biden administration did and said, oh, this previously negotiated peace deal by the Trump administration. Oh, shit. Is that tomorrow? Oh, yeah, that's tomorrow. I better get that project done. And then they just bolted. Like, there's no excuse for that level of ineptitude.
Yeah.
So.
And then again, like ineptitude, I thought you were selling us the fact that this guy isn't inept. In fact, he's the most adept at this kind of thing, at handling these things. Plus, he cares. He cares about every individual. That's why he makes a good president, because he, God damn it, if for nothing else, he's a good Christian man and he wants the best for everyone in this world. But if the best for everyone in this world means that you just, let's be honest, like I don't know if I've already said it, but I've seen 16-year-old fathers with better pullout game than Joe Biden. Like this is ridiculous. Like it's like exactly like you said. It's like he woke up and shit. We gotta get the troops home. Just said like, all right, pack your shit, and throw what you got in your hand in the back of the carrier, and let's get the hell out of here. Like,
yeah, and I mean. So listen, there is plenty of blame to go around on Joe in that regard, but I will say personally, and I don't know if David agrees with this, but my feeling of the whole thing is it's ugly, it's a mess. The way that it happened should not have happened that way. But if I am given two really shitty choices of messy withdrawal or no withdrawal at all, I'll take the messy, ugly, stupid withdrawal that we've had versus staying there for another 5, 10, or 20 years or indefinitely, as the Crenshaws of the world would advocate for. So, credit where it's due. I don't think Biden has done anything remotely good in his entire time as president until this. This I will give him credit for actually following through and withdrawing. Now, I'm also not naive. He says he's going to send back a couple thousand to make sure the evacuation's fine. And if that's all he does, fine. But is that going to be an excuse for further escalation? Would I be surprised? Not at all.
It's like that, like the kid that wouldn't do his homework all the time and then would just hand it in blank with his name on it and would get a 0. And it's like, he actually did his homework this time and tried. He still failed miserably, but at least it was filled out. He answered D and C and like put some effort in. He definitely spent at least 5 minutes on this particular homework sheet.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So with that being said, let's go back to Crenshaw, to kind of close out the episode, because he recently wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. And this thing is filled front to back with just neocon shit fuckery. I mean, it's stupid. It is filled with just non sequiturs and illogical leaps and trying to prove negatives and burden shifting and basically every logical fallacy you can think of. And I thought it was quite funny as I was reading through it in particular, because Crenshaw likes to prop himself up as the anti-AOC. Right? Because they're, at least nominally in the same generation, and AOC is this super lefty kind of government's going to fix everything, and Crenshaw is this constitutional conservative and fiscal conservative who, is going to get America back to its glory days, right? And so he's the kind of anti-AOC. But as you read through some of his arguments and the way that he fights for, no pun intended, continuing to stay in quagmires that are doing nothing but waste money and lives, he uses the same illogical, just dumb shit arguments that you would expect from AOC on a subject matter like climate change, or that you would expect from somebody like Fauci on COVID. Like we
said we're not doing it.
But I said there was going to be a mention or two, and this is it.
Slippery slope day.
And I want to use some quotes from his article to kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about here. So, but again, we're going to focus on Crenshaw because he really does summarize that side of the argument and just how stupid it is. So, right out of the gates, he accuses people like us who would be, anti-war or, America doesn't need to be the world police, that kind of thing. He says that we're living in a dream world. And I thought that was a rather interesting choice of words, because it's not at all considered a dream world from his side of the perspective, where the United States government hasn't been engaging in these sort of regime change wars since 1953, all the time with the same results. And yet that's not a dream world that the next one that we do can be a resounding success if we just stay there forever. That's not a dream world.
You can't lose if you never leave, Dane. Get it through your thick fucking skull, all right?
That is true. And he thinks that, what got us to the point, and this is a direct quote from him, quote, "But what got us here," and he's referring to the withdrawal and the basics, screwed up situation we're in as the last week. "What got us here was the widespread belief, it's another interesting choice of words, that American foreign policy should be dictated by a simple slogan of no more endless wars." Really? That's what got us here. It's the people saying no more endless wars are the ones that got us in all the wars in the first place.
Wait, so you didn't listen to us before you went into the war, but now that we're leaving the war, you're listening to us? That's interesting. Yeah. So you're listening to us when it's a bad idea, but you're not listening to us when it's a good idea. Yeah. In your mind.
So after you, and I'm speaking directly to Crenshaw.
Again, going back to that accountability thing. It's funny how quickly accountability switches.
It's always our fault. Yeah. Right. It doesn't matter that we throw them $2 trillion, thousands of lives, 20 years. Doesn't matter. It's still going to be our fault no matter what.
We said, yeah, sure, go ahead and get that liberal arts degree. I'm sure it will pay off in the long run. I'm just supportive of, fuck you, Dad.
But I'll see that quote unquote widespread belief, Crenshaw, and I'll raise you another one. This idea amongst you neocons that bombs spread peace. That's a pretty widespread belief, that you think that you can just go in completely devoid of any cultural context at all and just say, you know what, we're going to spread democracy with bombs. I got a question for you, Crenshaw. If the Chinese came over to the United States and they wanted to spread communism, for example, but instead of doing it by subverting our higher education and stuff like that, and they did it by dropping bombs on us, how receptive do you think the American people would be to the ideology of communism if it was dropped at the tip of a bomb?
Every other country
might push back against that.
Every other country is Tina Turner, and we're Ike Turner. We just punch him in the face and go, "I love you, baby." And she goes, "What's love got to do with it?" So, and then she loves us, and then they implicitly love us and accept us as saviors. That's exactly how it works.
That's a very, very apt analogy.
Thanks.
But yeah, I would say that, democracy, at the drop of a bomb is a much more widespread belief that kind of guides the policy of the foreign policy establishment in DC much, much more than the no more endless wars ideology does. The no more endless wars usually only happens on the back end of 20 years of wasted time and money and lives. So, shifting the blame to, the reason why Afghanistan is unmitigated disaster is because people don't want no more endless wars. Well, what about you dickheads that keep getting us into all of them? That the slogan, guess what? The no more endless wars slogan doesn't exist if we're not in endless wars. Have you thought about that for 2 seconds? You absolute dipshit. I don't think so, because this is the same kind of stuff that you and people like you just repeat ad nauseum every single war. It's the same thing. It's the anti-war people. They don't have the stomach for it. It's all their fault, not our fault for getting into it. It drives me insane.
And then again, to track back to what we were talking about earlier, it's always these people that say that nobody has the stomach for it. Well, it turns out that they don't either, because all these people that are writing these policies that create this power vacuum that other people are going to have to endure the consequences, they get to go home at night and sleep in their cushy beds. Meanwhile, there's literally people hanging on to airplanes that are taking off, climbing up to 500 feet before they fall off because they think that that's a better alternative to the future that they have in that country, which was created by that policymaker that says that we don't have the stomach for it. Okay, motherfucker, if you think we don't have the stomach for it and you think your job was so great, move to Afghanistan right now. If you think that your policies were so infallible that you created the dream world that you were living about, go ahead and move over to Afghanistan. See how that works out for you. Talk to any of the refugees that want out of there so bad, they will literally hang on to a plane that they know they have zero chance of making it.
Yeah. And I mean, and again, if you say that to a Crenshaw, first thing I'll say is, well, they're leaving because the Taliban, which we've kept at bay, are going to be back in power. I'm pretty sure, Dan, that the people that live there aren't super excited about the pedophiles and other murderers that we just replaced the Taliban with because they happen to be on our side. You know, just because we drape the people that we like and are still committing atrocities in the country, just because we drape them with the American flag doesn't automatically turn them into angels. I don't know if that's, something you're familiar with, but I got news for you, buddy. It's not exactly like Afghanistan over the last 20 years has become a modern, civilized Western society, just with democracy front to back, and everybody got rid of their old cultural traditions and everything that made them, that they take pride in. I don't think it's utopia. So, this idea that America's staying there and we can just spend some more money and waste some more lives and that'll fix it. Like, again, that's always this constant. And here's one of the points I want to make about Dan Crenshaw being an AOC of the Republicans. Think about climate change or the response to COVID. What is one character trait that constantly basically gives life to those policies? It's the constant shifting goalposts. Well, if you just put the masks on, or if you just get the one vaccine, if you just get the 47th booster, if you just get another 6th round of lockdowns, right? I know. Shifting goalposts, right? Climate change, same thing. The goalpost is constantly shifting. And AOC will make arguments for her Green New Deal, and Fauci will make arguments for his COVID policy of the day, constantly shifting goalposts. And that is exactly what Dan's doing here. It's, 1 year didn't do it, 5 years didn't do it, 10, 20 years didn't do it. Well, maybe we need another 10 or 20 or 40 or 50.
Well, if you couldn't get it done in the first 2 decades, why would you need another decade? What are you going to do different in the next 2 decades that you haven't done the first 2 decades? Like, again, it's like, I don't know, it's infuriating because it's never their fault. They will never come out and say, we bungled these operations, we bungled this entire war. It's our fault. We'll be better next time. Right now, we're going to go home. We're going to take care of our own. We're going to start building the infrastructure in this country and making sure that it's better tomorrow than it was today. That's never what they come out and say. They say that it's the American people's fault, that we didn't have the stomach for it, that the policies that were written were trying to appease us just as much as... No.
Yeah.
You can't blame the passenger in the Uber for getting in the car accident just because they ordered the Uber. I was in the car, dude. I wasn't driving. It's not my fault, man. I'm sorry.
And so, here's another quote from Crenshaw. He says that the growing impatience that leads to the withdrawal from Afghanistan, it, quote, fails to acknowledge trade-offs. Another interesting choice of words, which I'm really glad that Dan brought this up and we've talked about this on the episode a lot within the context of economics. Trade-offs are an important thing. When the government extracts money from the economy and directs it into Project X, let's say they want to build a bridge to nowhere, government will say, see, look at that beautiful bridge we built. Isn't it great? We employed people to build it. It stimulated the economy. It was all great. But the trade-off is what you don't see is that what would those resources have been put to in the free market if it wasn't forcefully extracted from them by the government? Now, that's an important economic concept about trade-offs. And within the context of Afghanistan, sticking purely with the economics, what could America have done with $2 trillion, Dan? Well, it would be only $28 trillion in debt instead of 30. So, I mean, that's good as far as that goes. But if that $2 trillion was spent domestically, maybe we wouldn't be having this stupid debate about the infrastructure bill or about forgiving student loans or homelessness or what. Pick your domestic policy kerfuffle of the day that you say, oh, these stupid lefties, I can't believe they want to do X, Y, or Z.
I saw some shit like that. Like they could pay off all student loans. They could end homelessness for like 168 years. They could do like all these great, like the infrastructure, like all the roads and all the things that are crumbling could have been replaced like 3 times over. It's like, yeah, we could have actually used all that for good here.
Yeah. And again, that's not us saying that we would support those kind of things, because again, taxation is theft. But the point is, Dan,
if you're going to thief it, at least use it for good.
The point is, Dan, that some serious trade-offs happen. And instead of enriching, Raytheon for, the last 2 decades, maybe that money could have been spent somewhere else. Or let me give you another trade-off, Dan. I believe it was the CIA, and if it wasn't the CIA, it was another intelligence agency, which ran the numbers. And they found something along the lines of 5 or 7 to 1. For every terrorist you blow up in the Middle East, every single guy you blow up, you radicalize 5 to 7 more.
What a concept.
So now that shouldn't seem too earth-shattering, because if you got to drop a hellfire, you're not just going to hit the one guy, but you might hit a bunch of children who then radicalizes their family. That's a rather interesting trade-off, right, Dan? If you're fighting a war where the trade-off is for every one bad guy you kill, you create 5 to 7 more, that seems like a fight you're never going to win, just based on pure math. So
you're fighting the Hydra.
So let me ask you, Dan, do those trade-offs don't matter? Maybe those aren't the ones that you were considering when you talked about trade-offs, right? So, and here's another one. Here's one that Dan is going to make a logical fallacy that all the politicians just love to always appeal to. So here he says, quote, "If we evacuate Afghanistan, what will happen?" The no more endless wars crowd always refuses to answer this. I'll answer it for you, Dan. This whole what will happen is a classic unfalsifiable claim that shifts the burden to your opponents. For you to say the reason that there has been no more terrorist attacks in the United States for the last 20 years because we've been in Afghanistan is a completely unfalsifiable claim that is absolute bullshit. You can't prove that. And by you not being able to prove it, you're shifting the burden to us to prove that that's not the case, to prove that if we had just surgically struck in Afghanistan, killed Osama and left within a year or two, or even when we actually killed him in, what was it, 2013? So if we had been out of there for 8 years already, you're trying to say that in the last 8 years, there would have been a terrorist attack. That's utter bullshit. That's the same thing as AOC saying, if we don't enact the Green New Deal now, we're going to have all of this economic destruction and Florida's going to be completely underwater in 100 years. An unfalsifiable claim that nobody should give any credence to because she's burden shifting. And you're doing the exact same shit by saying, well, it's a good thing we were in Afghanistan for 20 years because if not, we would have had some terrorist attacks. But now that we're gone, we're probably going to have some pretty soon. Come on, Dan. Like, that's beneath a 5th grader. That's not even a logical argument that is even worthy of a 5th grader.
Well, and then again,
and you're the anti-AOC. Give me a break.
That's that Patriot Act thing. It's like the Patriot Act is the most unpatriotic thing that's ever been passed in legislation. It's like they're using that fear to get what they want for you to see their side. But what I will say to periscope this one out, to look at to go from the granular to the macro, the best way to avoid this kind of calamity, to avoid this kind of tragedy, to avoid losing these types of wars that Dan Crenshaw is so vehemently willing to fight, but doesn't want to lose. You know how you don't lose wars?
You don't start them.
Exactly. Yeah. The best way to avoid a tragedy is not to set the events in motion that caused the tragedy to begin with.
Yeah.
And then the next time you're voting for a war, know the consequences of what you're voting for. It's not okay, I'm going to go send these people over there, they're going to bomb, and then I never have to actually see it, and I get to tell everybody what a patriot I am. No. This is actually happening. There are actually humans. And I know it's hard to conceptualize here in America, or even in the more, affluent parts of the world. There's literally humans tonight that don't know whether or not they will wake up tomorrow with their head still intact. without being radicalized, without losing a loved one, without that's literally what's happening right now.
And I mean, we could tit for tat, Dan, all day on this unfalsifiable claim stuff. I could sit here and just talk out of my ass too and say, well, Dan, you know what? Based on this 5-to-1 or 7-to-1, whatever the number is, of radicalization that we've been doing, who knows how many extra Osama bin Ladens we have just created in the last 20 years. So maybe instead of making us more safe and more secure with these forever wars, maybe we've made ourselves infinitely, exponentially more at risk for future terrorist attacks because we've basically multiplied Osama bin Laden by at least a factor of 5 to 7. So I can just unfalsifiable claim right back at you all day, and who's right? So this idea, and again, this is exactly what people like him and the other foreign policy intelligentsia, they're going to appeal to in the future. If in the unfortunate circumstance that there is a future terrorist attack, they're going to say, see, we should have stayed there forever. And then therefore the next one that we get in, we got to stay in it forever.
And they'll use that fervor.
And around it goes.
They'll use that fervor to get into another one.
And it's the same stupid shit that an AOC does to get her Green New Deal
There's a
passed.
reason why there's a saying that says cooler heads prevail.
Exactly.
And that's when all around you is going chaotic. That's when you need to be the most calm and most critically thinking. Otherwise, you'll have another goddamn Afghanistan. You'll have another goddamn 9/11. You'll have everything else all over again. Because those who do not learn from the past are condemned to repeat it.
Yeah. And here's our next little quip from Dan. So, and this is just probably more than anything in this episode, this is one of the more infuriating things because it doesn't even take a history degree to know this. All you had to do was be remotely awake 18 months ago or a little over 18 months, when Trump negotiated the ceasefire with the Taliban in February of 2020 to start beginning peace talks of withdrawal. Which, by the way, Dan spends this whole time basically saying, oh, well, this anti-war, it's only summed up by the Democrats and Biden is its cheerleader or whatever. He forgets that the timetable that Biden was on, which he actually moved back a couple months because Trump's original timeline was to be out by May of 2021. So Biden is a few months late. But this timeline was all set in motion by the Trump administration. So this idea that it's only stupid Democrats and Biden that are responsible for this, and is again, just disingenuous lying. But Crenshaw has a quote in there because he's basically clapping back at the anti-war crowd and saying, well, these stupid rubes, they don't know how to distinguish between a small security force to keep a lid on terrorism versus nation building. And the statistic he appeals to is, he says, in the last 18 months, there's been no combat deaths. Well, isn't it a rather important detail if you're going to make that claim, Dan, that in the last 18 months, we've been operating under a ceasefire with the Taliban? Wouldn't you expect U.S. deaths to go down in those 18 months? And that if you happen to break that agreement and say, deal's off, we're staying, that they're not going to start shooting and U.S. combat deaths are going to go back up? So for you to say that, well, see, we haven't had any U.S. deaths for 18 years, so there's proof right there. We're not doing nation building. It's just a small security force. You're a lying piece of shit, Dan, because that's a completely disingenuous claim to make. If you don't say in your article that we haven't had any deaths because there's a ceasefire, and therefore if we stay, ceasefire's off and American troops die, well, then where's your argument on whether or not it's nation building and whether or not the cost is worth it in terms of more American lives? You're lying out your ass. And it only takes an 18-month-old memory, which I understand the American public's memory of these kind of things is about as long as a goldfish. So you can get that past most people. But that's a rather important detail if you're going to make that claim. And for your argument, it's like it never happened. 18 months because the American fighting force is so smart, so great, and so ingenious that nobody's been dying for 18 months. Like, come on, Dan. Come on.
Come on, bro.
And, we could go on. There's more that Dan said in this article, and it just... I want to end here, but I do have one more thing to say.
Oh, God.
David's giving me the look. It's been too long. I know it's been too long, and here's the last thing, because what's kind of subtle and insidious about people like Dan Crenshaw, and again, I'm just using him as the figurehead because he opened his stupid mouth about it in the Wall Street Journal, but he is really kind of speaking as the figurehead for the general neocon foreign policy establishment, is these veiled what if threats. And we talked about this, just a second ago. But he ends his article by saying, 20 years after 9/11, I pray they don't become equally dire for Americans at home. And he's talking about the consequences of leaving. He's hoping that 20 years after 9/11, and hopefully 20 years after this withdrawal, that another 9/11 type event doesn't happen. And when you really read between the lines on that, what's he saying? He's saying that we're the smart ones, right? Those of us that make the foreign policy decisions, those of us that get on the ground and quote unquote shoot the bad guys, those of us that keep the lid on terrorism, it's because of us that no more 9/11s have happened. And, we just discussed that a couple minutes ago, so we don't need to rebeat that dead horse. But it's kind of a veiled threat when you really think about it, because the world is a scary place. And the American, if anything we learned from 9/11, it's that the American intelligence apparatus is hopelessly inept at stopping threats, even if they're identified. Right? That was the whole point of 9/11, is that some agencies had bits and pieces to the puzzle, but because the FBI wasn't talking to the CIA, wasn't talking to this group, wasn't talking to that group, that they slipped through the cracks and 9/11 happened. And then therefore, that's why we need the Department of Homeland Security. We got the Patriot Act and a whole new federal bureaucracy out of that kerfuffle. And if we learned anything from that situation, it's that the people that are leading us are fucking idiots.
And like we've said before, Daniel, I think the FBI, the CIA, and Homeland Security has thwarted exactly 0 terrorist attacks over the past 20 years. And you're going to say that the reason why is because we were in Afghanistan? That was the only reason why?
Yeah, I mean, we've linked...
Because they didn't actually happen because you were in Afghanistan?
Right, yeah. That's the whole reason why they weren't doing it, yeah. And... Gotcha. It's like we've shared that article before about, when the TSA did that, test to see how effective they're doing at airports. So they had agents go undercover and try to sneak weapons through, and they failed like 95 out of 100 times. Mm-hmm. These guys were like getting guns and knives through, and the TSA wasn't finding it. So, this idea that these people that are leading us are the ones that are keeping us safe is completely stupid. So when Dan has this kind of veiled threat, like, it's really a shame we left Afghanistan. It's going to be a shame if a 9/11 type event happens in the near
hope
future.
It doesn't.
He's already stacking the decks for people like him in the future to be like, yep, this is why we need to go to another forever war. This is why we need another Patriot Act 2.2 that shits on the Constitution even more, which Dan allegedly cares about. This is why we need people like him, dictating the foreign policy coming out of D.C.
Instead of applying a little critical thought and saying, oh, that's why you don't go into forever wars, because then you make a lot more enemies, and it's a lot harder to keep yourself safer when there's a lot more people that want to cause you harm.
Yeah.
That would be my idea.
If you multiply the people that hate you, how is that ever going to lead to a good outcome?
I guess my argument for the 20-year war, for the forever war, is like, if you want to fight a fight that you never win, don't fight that fight. Yeah. If you're just in there to patty cake around and do what you have to in the moment, fine. Or you're either going in there to win, or you're going in there for ulterior motives. And we clearly didn't go in there to win, because 20 years later, you should have seen at least one goal up on the scoreboard. Right. Period.
So, we started out, what's the meme to destroy? And it's this meme that, without the government, we just wouldn't be safe. And it really is, it's not a million light years removed from the same memes that undergird, when AOC goes to bat for her Green New Deal, or when Fauci comes out and says, a criticism of me is an attack on science. It really is this fundamental belief that people like AOC, Fauci, and Crenshaw have in themselves, that they are smarter, better at everything than you in their particular area of quote unquote expertise. And that you need them to keep you safe, to make sure the climate doesn't change, to make sure...
It's almost like they're trying to convince you that you need them for their own sake.
Yeah. Which is exactly what you would expect when you think that, the people that staff the federal government is only about 1% of the entire American population. So you really, in a true mathematical sense, have 1% of the people lording their decisions over the other 99%. In fact,
I would argue that a lot, and if you really think that these people are just smarter because they're elected officials, I bet you could find 90% of the American population on any given subject that the government is dealing with at that current moment that probably knows more than the person that is representing their district at that moment in Washington, D.C.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I would take Scott Horton, who, again, is criminally underrated in terms of his knowledge of foreign policy, especially in the Middle East. He would wipe the floor with somebody like Dan Crenshaw. And he's not a war vet. He's a skater dude from California or something like that. But he has studied the subject, talked to a lot of people that been on the ground, been in positions of government everywhere in between, and has thought critically about the situations and has formed his own opinions and doesn't just resort to these second grade level platitudes of they hate us because we're free, or we're fighting over there so we don't fight them over here, and all those stupid memes that Crenshaw has appealed to in his op-ed. And, one Scott Horton is worth 1,000 Crenshaws. But, you're not allowed to listen to him because he isn't a U.S. congressman, or he wasn't over there fighting, or whatever.
And if you think that we're being a little too verbose, or you think we're being, come on, guys, that can't be true. Well, all these people did just have 20 years to get one job done, and they failed miserably.
20 years, $2 trillion. I don't know how many American lives have been lost over in Afghanistan, but it's over a couple thousand.
Or how many Afghanistan lives were lost fighting for whichever side that they were fighting for.
Yeah.
Human lives lost.
And not to get too conspiracy theory, but the opioid epidemic that took place in America just so happened to be under 20 years of opioid field management under the U.S. military. Not connecting any dots there. I'm just saying it's a matter of coincidence.
Don't want to sound Tin Hattie over here, or Aluminum Hattie.
Top to bottom, that meme of without the government, you wouldn't be safe, that meme has got to be destroyed. We hope that this episode is just one extra step in that direction, and that maybe it encourages you to ask more questions of the Crenshaws of the world.
Hold them accountable. Just keep holding these people accountable, and eventually we'll get back on the right track.
If you don't trust AOC on domestic policy regarding climate change, then sure as hell don't trust what Dan Crenshaw has to say on foreign policy.
And there you go.
So, with that being said, we knew this was a long one. I knew it was going to be from when we started because I had a lot to say about Crenshaw and the neocons. So I'm going to take it on the chin for this one. But definitely check us out next week for episode 58. Who knows what kind of catastrophe is going to happen between now and then.
Let's just hope it's another lighthearted episode. Yeah. It's all about gumdrops and lollipops and whether or not we can maintain our mental capabilities for another week.
And, and if we can't, we're just going to go in on somebody else.
There you go. Pick a target of our choosing and just beat the hell out of it.
Verbally hellfire missile the shit out of them.
So, Dane, let's just recap one more time. Where can you find this podcast?
You can find this at wmdpodcast.com/57 for this episode in particular. But definitely while you're over there, check out the rest of the website. Go to the Support Us tab and figure out how you can throw some bones our way. Come to the Solutionary Summit being held in Miami, September 3rd through 5th.
Meet us in person. Live meet and greet.
Exactly. And but you can also find us on any podcast catcher. Just search Weapons of Meme Destruction. Also, you can find our episodes on YouTube and link up with us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. But other than that,
let's get to know each other.
Yeah.
You've had us in your ear holes. Let us in your heart holes.
That's right.
And with that, we'll
see you next week.
See you cool cats and kittens next week.
Over and out.